Yeah, I totally agree. Now, when we're talking about preparedness and going out and people starting to see the future as in a crystal ball fashion, the crop losses that we've had this year in Europe, some losses in Australia, people writing me down from Sao Paulo in Brazil telling me it's the coldest they've ever experienced. When we're going forward, are we going to be looking at exponential losses? Will Europe be engulfed next year more than it is now? Will it taper off? Or how do you see the different areas of the planet? If we look back at temperature reconstructions, and I noticed in the book you were talking about beryllium-10, oxygen-18, carbon-14 is getting reconstructions for temperature. How do we see it playing out in different regions of the world? Is it just going to be a straight repeat of what we saw in the 1600s or the 1800s? Or is it going to be something new that's going to be a little bit different than past patterns that we've seen? In your own opinion.
Well, it's a coin toss between a Dalton or Maunder class right now, but using my current theory, RC theory and calculations shows that a Dalton class will be what the eddy minimum will produce. That means we should be prepared for routine crop losses of 30% or greater, almost on an annual basis. Unfortunately, in some years in the early 2030s, we should expect a catastrophic loss, 50 to 80% in certain crops, corn, wheat, and soybeans. And of course, the higher latitudes of Russia, Northern Europe, and very, very difficult to sustain crops for many years during the bottom period of this next eddy minimum. So we're looking at wholesale global adjustments to massive shortages. That's why I'm encouraged that there are at least some people developing inside greenhouses. We're talking very large ones that have stories of growing beds under new LED light technology. We've also seen cold resistant rice strains being developed. So we need to be going full bore into adjusting to the new cold climate. Regrettably, because of the 8 years of loss of productivity, or loss of progress rather, by the Obama administration, we're vastly unprepared for what's coming. We lost 8 years effectively in getting ready for the new cold climate and the related crop damage. And by the way, who's going to hurt the most? It's going to be the poor, the African American community, the poor side of America, the people who have no resources to make adjustments whatsoever, who will have to shelter in place, to survive in place during a period of dramatically higher food prices, regular food shortages, and for those who are in an earthquake area, weeks or months on end with no power and no water. That's the worst case scenario, but unfortunately, that's what history tells us is coming. The majority of Americans, sadly, will have no way to prepare for this. They'll simply have to get by as best they can. That's why in the book Upheaval, we put in specific steps for even those people who cannot adjust and will have to shelter in place during some of these worst periods. We give specific steps on how to prepare now. For example, I'm recommending every car or truck that you drive, you've got to have at least a 72-hour food and water supply in a kit in your trunk. I mean, if you're living on the San Andreas Fault and you don't have that, you're putting your life at risk. If one of these 7.0 or 8.0 quakes knocks out San Francisco or LA again, you could be facing months without water or power because all the underground power and water lines are going to be fractured. And it's going to take weeks and months to repair them. And this is not just me alone that's talking about the threat of a catastrophic San Andreas fault. Dr. Thomas Jordan, one of the most respected geologists in America and director of the Southern California Earthquake Prediction Center, has said that the San Andreas is locked, loaded, and ready to roll, in his words. He's talking about an 8.0. And that will totally devastate the LA basin. Millions of people in LA and San Diego are going to be affected. Long periods of time without food and water and fuel, and with massive infrastructure damage, it's going to be very, very difficult for people to get home from work, for fuel to be brought in for cars and trucks. and businesses to operate, power grid losses across Southern California and across the Southwest. Once these grids are damaged in an LA environment or a San Francisco environment, they tend to cascade and knocking out other grids in the neighborhood. So we're talking about multi-state grid losses, multi-state impacts from these catastrophic quakes. So not a pretty picture, but again, we have specific steps in upheaval on what people, even for those who are unable to prepare.
Yeah, and that's the main message, is preparation. And when we come into beyond the preparation, I like to leave the message of hope here. I really believe we're in the greatest possible investment opportunity coming up, because we need to, as you say, reinstall everything for food growing. And that'll include the vertical towers with the LED lights and different types of crops that we're going to need to shift to, different seeds. We're going to have to pull the growing zones south. We're going to have to change the entire way that we do our agriculture globally. Now, what I see is an incredible opportunity and people working together to bring this about. You know, if the catastrophic quakes come, or the EBT card's going to be up, and really how much food do people have stored? There's just so many factors at play here. And then you got to throw in the volcanism as well, the increased volcanism. What if there's a major volcano that goes off, like Laki or something, or Tambora? That's going to be just an extra wild card in the mix there. There's so many factors going on, but preparedness, regardless, now you literally three possible things. You need to get prepared and work with your community.
No question about it. And I like the community aspect, and certainly the neighborhood aspect. No one family is going to be able to survive this. It's really going to take a family group, several families working together, or a street working together. But unfortunately, I think the real scenario here is that most people will ignore the warnings. They're already ignoring the warnings here in the U.S. that you have been so diligent and accurate at bringing out. Crop damages are already occurring on a massive scale, especially in Europe. But most people in the U.S. are totally unaware, and they're not doing a thing to prepare for it. Unfortunately, as we've talked about before in this interview, people are going to have to get hit between the eyes with a 2x4 in the form of catastrophic crop losses from cold or catastrophic earthquakes before they finally realize their lives are about to change.
Yeah, there's always going to be a percentage of the population that is never going to change their belief system, even if the 2x4 does hit them, because they've been brought up for all these years through the education system. It's CO2, it's CO2. It's got to keep warming. And then when it cools, this year, in my own opinion, 2018, 17 will not be the warmest years ever. Then what? They're still not going to accept it. And at what point does it come where you just like, all right, we got it, we have to change, but you're not with us because you just can't literally change your belief system.
Correct.
You know, we got to overcome one of these great obstacles, the belief system that has been set in place with the CO2 religion, that it's not even based on science anymore. It is a religious type of movement now. You know, how do you come over that? And that's going to be one of the greatest obstacles going forward with this. Crop losses are here. It's in your face. You know, they're fighting in Europe, in the UK, for heads of lettuce. When a head of lettuce that you're really willing to push people or pull them or hit them to get a head of lettuce, where's this going to come to when we get into the real crop losses? And there is no backup at that point. There is no, okay, something will come to the store next week or next month. Something might not come to the store ever. Then we're really on our own. And this is when I believe humanity will pull back together. And when you talked about the neighborhoods and streets getting together, it sounds very reminiscent of old settlements in the U.S. People relied on each other. That you had to have them around to survive. That's why the close-knit relationships evolved at that time. Go down to Cades Cove in Tennessee and see how they lived with the farms down there. And they all survived through some of the most brutal Dalton minimum winters in Cades Cove in the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee. How did they survive? They didn't do it alone. They helped each other in a community.
Absolutely. But again, all this is underpinned by education. People need to be educated at what's really true about the climate, what causes climate variation, and what's coming in a realistic sense, and then how best to prepare. Clearly, a large percentage of the population are so now brainwashed by 30 years of man-made global warming propaganda, they simply don't even want to hear the facts. I speak throughout the country, and it's amazing to me how many people literally get up and walk out. They simply cannot handle the scientific facts of what causes climate change. As you pointed out, it's almost like insulting someone's religion. They just don't want to talk about it. They don't want to hear it. And they certainly aren't preparing for what's coming. One of the concerns I have, and I voiced this in Upheaval, is that these very same people who say that man runs the climate are the first ones that will come knocking on your door when they don't have any food or water.